right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am super excited for you all to be here. This is my first time going live on the College Health MD page. So welcome to all of you. As you can see, I have a very special guest and I am going to be introducing her in just a moment. I just want to take a couple of minutes to welcome you all to College Health MD. Some of you may know me from Your GPS Doc. Some of you may know me personally, but I did launch this page, I think about a month or so ago, really because I felt that you all deserved your own space. For those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Nicole Rochester. I am a board certified pediatrician. I am a former family caregiver, and I'm the CEO of Your GPS Doc. And the mission of my company is to help individuals and their family caregivers navigate this crazy, complicated healthcare system. But I'm also a college mom. And so a couple of years ago, when my daughter went off to college, I started creating more content related to helping college students and their parents and navigating that new journey of managing their own health, managing their own healthcare. And in complete transparency, I was kind of mixing that content in with the Your GPS Doc traditional audience. And so you may see something about elder care, and then you may see something about college students, and that really wasn't fair to either audience. So about a month or so ago, I decided to create College Health MD as a college health division of Your GPS Doc. So again, thank you to all of you who are joining us live. Welcome ahead of time to those of you who will catch the replay. And so I've told you a little bit about myself. I want to introduce my amazing guest, Dr. Ericka Goodwin. Dr. Ericka, she's a lot of things. I'm going to let her fill in the details because Dr. Ericka does a lot, you all. But the reason that I invited Dr. Ericka tonight is because Dr. Ericka is a board certified, get this, child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. So she is an expert when it comes to all things mental health. And I thought it was really important to have her on with me tonight so that we can have this discussion with you all about college and about the mental health challenges that our students are going through, not just during COVID, but beyond COVID. So Dr. Ericka, thank you so much for agreeing to be on College Health MD and have this discussion with us tonight. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Well, number one, I can never say no to Dr. Nicole Rochester. How can I say no? You say yes. Can you be here? I'm like, just tell me when. So I'm really honored to be here. I'm honored and happy to be able to spend some time with all of you out there in virtual land, given that we are now so used to being in the virtual. Yes. So I appreciate the lovely intro. Again, I'm Dr. Ericka, Harvard-trained double board certified psychiatrist and integrative lifestyle coach. I'm on a mission to help women feel seen, valued, and whole on their own terms. But today, it doesn't matter your gender. I'm just here to help you get through all of this craziness with your sanity intact. And one of the special things about being a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist is we have a unique understanding of the full life cycle. And one of the things that all of you out there know is that college students are they're in that gray area. They just got out of adolescence, but they don't quite have this adulting thing down.
Exactly. Despite what they may think, right, Dr. Ericka?
Yes. So I'm just blessed to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate that you do take care of the whole spectrum, because the reality is, and we'll talk a little bit about this, we parents are struggling too. Our children are having some challenges, but this is a difficult time to be a college parent as well. At least I'm speaking for myself. You all can let me know. So you all, we are going to be entertaining your questions. We are going to be sharing some information with you. So feel free, let us know that you're here. Say hello in the chat. If you have questions or comments as we go throughout the broadcast, please feel free to type them in the comments. And then towards the end, I'll start to scroll through and we will address your questions live. So I wanted to start, Dr. Ericka was kind and gracious enough to indulge me on this, but what I wanted to do to start is we're going to share a little bit of information about ourselves. We are both college graduates, and I don't know how old Dr. Ericka is, but I will tell you all that I went to college quite a while ago. However, they say there's nothing new under the sun, right? And the reality is that while I do believe that today's youth are dealing with a lot more than we did, and certainly we didn't have to deal with the pandemic when we were in college, but we were in school, and there's always been challenges and struggles and things like that. And so we are each going to share something that we dealt with related to college and related to mental health. And I encourage you all, if you're comfortable, feel free to share in the chat as well. So I mentioned at the beginning that I am a pediatrician. I've known I wanted to be a pediatrician my entire life. And so and I'm sure Dr. Erica can relate to this, most people who want to be a doctor, particularly if you made that decision when you were young, you are kind of singularly focused on that goal. And so I have always been a high achiever. I've always been a perfectionist. These are things that I am getting rid of in the latter part of my years. But, that's really kind of a part of the mindset that goes along with that journey to becoming a physician. And so I went to Johns Hopkins University, very rigorous pre-medical program. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was burned out. And I don't think I used that term. I don't even think we were using the term burnout back then. But I just remember when I was finishing up that senior year, I had neglected so much of the fun activities in college. I mean, I was the one that was always studying. I was the one that was turning down invitations to hang out and things like that. And so by the time I got to my senior year, I just realized like I am really like exhausted mentally, physically. And it was a challenge because I had this decision, like, am I going to go straight to medical school? And for somebody like me, who was like this perfectionist, like the idea of taking off a year, like that whole gap year thing that, was it Malia? Like that was not cool back in the, 1980s.
It didn't have a name back then.
Exactly. So but all I knew is that I didn't feel that I was emotionally ready to go into medical school, which was kind of a shock to me. I didn't have any concern about being prepared academically, but emotionally, I just felt like I needed a break. And so after a lot of soul searching and a lot of prayer, a lot of tears, I made the decision to take off a year between college and medical school. And it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. But that's my little tidbit about my mental health challenges. And I don't even know, honestly, that I identified that as a mental health challenge back then. But in reflection and preparation for today and just thinking about my own kids, I realized like, wow, I was actually burned out as a 22-year-old young adult. So what about you, Dr. Erica? What can you share about your mental health journey in college?
Well, one of the things I can say is no wonder we get along so well because I'd wanted to be a pediatrician since I was 3.
Oh my gosh.
So I'd want to be a pediatrician until my second year of med school. So we're there.
Cool.
And I think for me, what it was is I ended up going to undergrad at Spelman. So I came to Spelman. We won't even get into when I came to visit and I didn't want to visit. My mother just dragged me because I was like, I'm going to go to Wash U. In retrospect, I'm like, it sounds ludicrous me going, I'd rather go to Wash U over Spelman. But I came, I fell in love. I was there and I was immersed into the Black college experience along with an experience of being at an all women's college. So for your viewers that may not be familiar with Spelman, Spelman is one of 2 historically Black women's colleges. So it was such a supportive environment and you saw so many strong and successful women that you get to a point where you forget that it's so special.
Mm.
And I was one of those people that I was always really smart. So I didn't actually learn how to study until medical school.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of crammed a little bit for the MCAT, showed up. After it was over, I'm gonna tell my age. We met up, my line sisters and I met up and we went to Freaknik. You know?
Shout out to the Freaknik.
Yes. And then I get to medical school. And I had to learn how to study in medical school. So instead of you burning out your senior year, I think I started burning out early in medical school. And it was compounded by the fact that I was so used to the supportive nature of being at a HBCU that to be at a non-HBCU and one that really didn't necessarily embrace that culture, it was a huge culture shock to no longer feel like I was in a supportive environment,
Yeah.
along with the fact that medical school is just extremely rigorous. So if you're learning how to study, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Yes, that is a
You
great way.
know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just remember I was just like so envious of the focus everyone had that had taken time off, because at that point I don't think it was that popular to not go straight through,
Yeah.
whereas I think for a lot of students now, some of them actually, more of them don't go straight through. But it was just a huge culture shock to shift those environments.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to share a little bit, some statistics related to mental health in college. And I know some of you watching are parents like myself. Some of you may be professionals like Dr. Ericka who work with college age students. Some of you, may just be watching. Maybe you have high school students and you're looking ahead. But I did want to share some information with you all related to college and mental health. So the American College Health Association conducts a survey, and this is an anonymous survey that your students may be participating in. And in this survey, the most recent results, over 60% of college students reported feeling overwhelmed by anxiety at least once in the preceding 12 months. Over 60%. Over 39% of college students reported feeling so depressed that it was difficult to function at least once during the school year. About 31% of college students actually reported that they had seriously considered suicide. That's almost a third of the respondents. And so that is, of course, like shattering. And then the other thing I wanted you all to know is that one of the reasons that college is a really special time and a time that we really need to pay close attention to our students is that in general, most mental illnesses will present by the age of 23 to 24. And so the reality is that for some of our kids, they may actually experience their first episode of a mental illness, whether it's depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, or even schizophrenia, while they are in college, while they are away out of our direct eyesight. And so it's another reason why I wanted to really have this discussion tonight with Dr. Ericka and with you all to make sure that you are aware of the significant impact of mental illness on college students and the uniqueness about that age and why they may be more susceptible to some of these challenges. So I also want to talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms, and then Dr. Ericka and I are really going to get into some dialogue about things specifically related to college and COVID. And like I said, we'll take your questions as well. So, many of you, I'm sure you're familiar with depression. I don't think there's anybody watching that can't say, I've never been depressed, or that can say, I've never been depressed. But there's a difference between feeling depressed or feeling down and actually having depression. Is that right, Dr. Ericka?
Yes.
So what's the difference between feeling depressed and actually having clinical depression?
So one of the things to keep in mind is, number one, with all of the mental health things, that we have what functions like a diagnostic Bible. There's a book that everybody uses, the same book. We do, social workers do, psychologists do, we all use the same book. And the name of the book is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I can't even talk today. Version 5. And the thing is how these things were developed was they started looking at what symptoms appeared together, and they're like, that's what we call it. So the first thing I like to let people know is sometimes people fit nicely into the little boxes. Sometimes they don't, partially because of the way our diagnoses were set up. It wasn't by biochemistry or something like that, that you may see in some other physical illnesses. So sometimes that's why you'll say someone seems to have two things, or they have a little of this and a little of that, is that some of the delineations are a little bit arbitrary.
Okay.
So part of the difference between just feeling depressed and having clinical depression. And there are a few different types of depression. We're not going to go into all of that because that's going to take us super duper left. But one of the biggest things we deal with in mental health is a concept of impairment. So it's really is how much is this getting in the way of your life and you doing the things you need to do. So there are times people may feel a little down, a little out, they spend a little time in bed and then they pop back up and they do everything they need to do. That's not going to be a level of impairment. That's going to be a full-fledged depressive disorder. Most of the depressive disorders we deal with have a variety of symptoms. So someone, number one, is going to have more symptoms than being sad.
Mm-hmm.
And typically they're going to be sad for a prolonged period. The other thing that we see, especially in young people, sometimes people are not as much sad as they're irritable.
Yes. And I'm so happy you said that. I just want to put a little pin in that to make sure that the parents and everybody else watching heard that, because you're right. Like, I think part of the worry that I have as a college parent is that, we have to be looking for these signs and symptoms. And like you said, I think traditionally people think, well, if my child's not sad, they don't seem sad, they're not crying, they're not down. But if they're constantly, if they're very irritable, if they're snapping at you and things like that, particularly if that's not their normal personality, that can actually be a sign of depression. So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, and you brought up a huge point because a lot of the symptoms, the key word is change. So one key word is impairment, the other key word is change. So it typically is change in sleep because there are symptoms where people sleep too much, some where people can't sleep at all. Changes in appetite. There are times where people don't have an appetite and they lose weight. Then there are times that people will eat more or emotionally eat, and then they're actually getting heavier. Other major symptoms include feeling guilty about things, like more guilty than they should, changes in concentration, a decreased energy level, feeling like everything is kind of blah. There's a fancy, if you want to sound super smart, there's a medical term for it. They call it anhedonia.
I'll type that in the chat.
But it basically is just when everything just feels blah, like they don't enjoy things anymore. Sometimes people will even say food doesn't even taste that good. It doesn't really have much of a taste anymore. But typically when someone is clinically depressed, they're going to have multiple symptoms for an extended period of time, usually at least 2 weeks. And it's going to get in the way of them doing, if they're a student, their schoolwork, if they are working, their work. It can get in the way of just being able to do what we call activities of daily living, such as just getting out of bed, showering, brushing your teeth, handling your business. But a lot of it is impairment. I know that was a long answer. I meant
no, that is absolutely perfect. So just to recap, you all, Dr. Erica was saying that it's generally prolonged at least 2 weeks. So, we all may have the blues for a day or two, but if it goes on for 2 weeks or longer, impairment is key. So, if your child, your college student is no longer able to function properly, if their grades are dropping, I mean, I think that's one of the key things that we may notice for those of us who do look at our kids' grades. If there's some sudden change in their academic performance, or if your child is somebody who used to go out, and I know we're in the middle of COVID, but maybe they used to hang out with their small, circle of friends, social distancing, of course. And now every time you call them, they're just in their dorm or they're in their apartment. Or maybe they used to like to draw, they used to like to journal, or they used to watch a particular TV show and they don't do those things anymore. Those are red flags that they may be dealing with depression. So you said impairment, and what was the other one? Was impairment? Oh, and a change in, because if you have a child that's naturally an introvert, then you may not be significantly concerned if they're staying in their dorm or in their apartment. But if your child was, the one who was always out and about, and now all of a sudden they have no desire to be with their friends, they don't even really want to talk to you on the phone, then that could be a big concern. And I also appreciate that you mentioned, the eating and the sleeping. So they can be sleeping a lot, or they can have difficulty sleeping, and they can be eating a lot, or they can be not eating at all and losing weight. So parents, you have to really pay attention to all of these nuances. What about anxiety? It almost seems like anxiety is, I mean, I don't know if epidemic is the right word to use, but the studies have shown that it is the number one reason that college students are presenting for mental health services when they seek care on their college campuses. My daughter gave me permission to share. So my college student has anxiety. And honestly, I think certainly during the COVID pandemic, I think I'm realizing that I have some anxiety as well. Why? Well, first, let's talk about some of the signs and symptoms. So we talked about depression. What are some of the classic signs and symptoms of anxiety, things that we may see in college students?
Well, the first thing is depression has multiple categories, but a lot of the symptoms are similar across. It just is kind of, you have postpartum, you have seasonal affective disorder, then you have dysthymic disorder. There are other things, but a lot of the core symptoms are similar.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety, the hard thing is sometimes people are like, anxiety. and there is definitely a wider variety of classification of anxiety disorders, from something like generalized anxiety disorder, which is just like it sounds, that's someone that's anxious about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have post-traumatic stress disorder as an anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder is an anxiety disorder, panic disorder is an anxiety disorder, specific phobias are an anxiety disorder. I think if I had to say what are some of the big caveats about anxiety, this is what's going to trip you up. And this is one of the reasons why it's important that Dr. Nicole is having this platform and having this show, is because there are going to be times where you're going to actually need to engage a professional, because these symptoms cross over.
Mm-hmm.
Because anxiety can also look like irritability.
Yes.
And a lot of people have probably experienced that in COVID, where they become a little bit more snappy or on edge, or things get on their nerves a little bit. So some of the main things that you'll see in anxiety is, some main anxiety symptoms are, sometimes people feel anxious and they know why. Sometimes people feel anxious and they don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't know why, but you feel anxious and you have no idea why, that's called free-floating anxiety. I'm giving you the tips tonight so you can sound
Free-floating anxiety. Okay, you're teaching me some things, Dr. Ericka.
Free-floating anxiety. But a lot of the other anxiety symptoms are symptoms that you see with other things. So people can have anxiety and have insomnia. Anxiety can also cause decreased concentration.
Mm-hmm.
With anxiety, people can also have what we call somatic symptoms. That's just a fancy word to say for physical symptoms. So they're physical symptoms that actually started in your mind, because sometimes your brain wants to let your body know something's up.
Yes.
So it gives you a physical symptom. So it doesn't mean you don't feel it. So we're not saying that somebody's lying.
Thank you.
It's just your body is kind of, it's like your body's sounding alert, like, hey, something's wrong up in here. So then people can have somatic symptoms like headaches. One common one is stomach ache. So if you think of kids, or when you're young, or if you have a really big meeting and you start getting nervous about it and your tummy starts feeling upset. So stomach aches, nausea. Some people will feel like it's harder for them to breathe, or that their heart's beating fast. And a lot of people have gotten nervous, and that's happened before. Mm-hmm. Now, when all of that happens and it's super intense and you feel like something horrible is going to happen or you might die, panic attack.
Got it.
That is a panic attack. But for a lot of people, most people that I see with anxiety don't actually have panic attacks. And there's a variable level of anxiety. So a lot of what the impairment, because we're back to that word impairment,
yes,
is, does it keep you from doing things? So some of the common things that anxiety might get in the way of is, it may get in the way of people socializing. Mm-hmm. It may get in the way of people coming out of the house, because they may feel like there are triggers when they come out. So you talk to a lot of people and they're like, I get really nervous when I'm in crowds or when I'm around a lot of people. So for what I do, one of the things is, people will say, I only go to Walmart like late at night. They won't go during the day when all the people are
there. Especially now, my goodness.
So it's like, you'll see the either social isolation, or people just don't feel comfortable coming out or being in groups or being around people. But a lot of it is just that feeling of discomfort, distress, that something bad's going to happen.
Okay. Thank you. That is really important. Thank you so much. So let's shift a little bit and start to talk about COVID. You've shared the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety. We've talked about, the college students, and they're at that age where some of these things are going to develop. And certainly, just that journey of being in school, all the stressors that go along with, being away from your family, even though our kids, when they're graduating high school, that's all they can talk about. For those that go away to school, they think it's this amazing thing. And they say, I can't wait. I can't wait to get away from my mom, my dad. But secretly, after you pull off from that move-in day, they have some anxiety about it, and they have some challenges with beginning to live their life without all the rules and without parents telling them what to do, and having to manage their academics, and some of them may have sports and social activities and things of that nature. And now, on top of all of that, we have thrown in a pandemic. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the extra stresses that come with COVID-19 and our college students. The fact that they are isolated. Many college students are, college students are very social creatures. And, most of them were sent home back in March. They were stuck in the house with their parents all spring, all summer. And they were really looking forward to some sense of normalcy with, the start of the fall semester. But lo and behold, for the most part, they're either taking classes remotely at home with mom and dad, or some of them, like my daughter, is living in an off-campus apartment. Some of them are in dorms, but they're certainly not enjoying what they thought was going to be their college life. And so how does that impact kind of those expectations of what they thought they were going to have? Also the isolation of having to, or they should be pretty, staying to themselves and not having large gatherings. What are your thoughts about how COVID is impacting the mental health of our college students?
Well, COVID has impacted them on so many levels, because I feel like you can separate these young people into two groups. One group is the group that was starting college that have never actually been to college.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the ones that were there. And the first issue was the fact is there's been so much unpredictability for a lot of the people I know, that when they were trying to figure out what they were doing with their kids, by the time they heard from the colleges what their plan was for the fall, it really was rather late. Some
Yes.
didn't know what was going on till June, July, or even August. And then you have some places where it was one policy, and then the numbers went up, and all of a sudden they went virtual after they were there, along with a lot of young people that were actually on campus when COVID hit. And then all these emergency calls had to go to parents, like, come get your kid like yesterday.
Exactly.
So I think the first thing is, for the children that had never been to college, one of the complicated things is, at least if your young person has already gone to college, they have some friends. So they're not connecting and doing things the same way, but they at least have some friends from college that they can connect with.
Mm-hmm.
The difficult thing for the young people who hadn't had a chance to go and meet people in that organic environment is that colleges have started to have to be very creative about creating ways for these young people to interact, mingle, and meet each other, because otherwise they don't have a sense of who their classmates are, anyone to talk about all those conversations we used to have in college about
Yes.
that test sucked, or what are you doing on Friday, or why is there only decent thing in the cafeteria Captain Crunch. They don't have, it really was. It was our food. The food in the caf is much better now, but when I was in college, this film and the food was not. We ate more Captain Crunch that we ever should have eaten in life. But they're not having those same social supports because they never had a chance to even meet their classmates.
Such a good point.
Which is difficult. And the other thing is you mentioned kind of that separation and individuation that happens for college students. So for the ones that would have been on their own that are now at home, then they're not dealing with that level of independence they would have had or they had prior. So now they're back under their parents' roof with their parents' rules, where before their rules were either the rules of their apartment or the rules of the dorm in the college, which were still a little bit different than being home.
Mm-hmm.
And being used to having more personal space and personal independence. The other thing I think that's complicated is that since there's not that separation, or it's stunted some, because you have these kids, the ones that are at school that are, either in a dorm or they're in an off-campus housing, still attempting to socially distance, and they're having to deal with the stress of managing how to manage yourself amongst other people when you have no control over what other people do.
Yes.
And I feel like it's very different doing that as someone over 40.
Yes.
uh, that at the age we're at, if there are people we know that are not taking COVID as seriously as us, there's not this pressure to still be, I can love you from afar, but I might not see you till 2022 at this rate.
There you have it.
And you can do what you want. It's no judgment. It's just the bubble I have, and the way I am distancing is your plan and my plan don't go together. It's a lot easier to say that as a full-fledged adult
Mm-hmm.
than as a young person. And then the complicated things is that even though our logic says these kids should only be in singles, that is not the case a lot of places.
True.
And even in situations where they may have a single room, a lot of places still are having suites.
Yes. Sharing bathrooms.
And common areas, kitchens.
Yes.
And having to figure out, what is your roommate or your suite mate doing?
Yep.
Because you can't be in control of them. Whereas a lot of us as full-fledged grown adults, you aren't going to be in my house if you aren't acting right.
Exactly. Such a good point. Those are all the things my daughter is dealing with. You just hit it right on the nail, hit the nail on the head. Yeah. And
So
that's a lot.
And
because they're naturally, they, even though they're young adults, late teen young adults, they are still very much under the influence of peer pressure, right? I mean, they're still at that developmental stage where they care, most of them, what other people think about them. They have a desire to fit in. They don't want to stand out. They don't really want to be different. And so if you are the student who's trying to do the right thing, but the people around you are like, oh, COVID, oh, it's no big deal, that poses a significant dilemma.
It does. And I think the other thing that's complicated with it is, number one, it's just the concern for your personal safety.
Yes.
is managing that, managing that away from home. If you're away from home, managing that concern, because if you're at home, then some of that shift of that responsibility for keeping you safe actually shifts to your parents.
Very true.
If you're away from home, all of that responsibility is on you, because you can't necessarily depend that these academic environments are going to do everything to keep you safe. In the ideal world, they would, but unfortunately, we have a lot of varied policies about the COVID. So, I think it's just such a varied environment. And, also a lot of them are dealing with the loss of the fact that this is not meeting their expectations. They've dreamt about college, they've dreamt about what activities they're going to do, or the people they're going to meet, or what they're going to pledge, all of this stuff.
Yes.
And it's all very different. And then you have the students that were active in different types of extracurricular activities, especially sports,
Mm-hmm.
that this is very, very different. So on top of the fact that they're dealing with a lot of losses,
yes,
it's also, you're looking at, depending on the model, because a lot of people are still doing remote school, is every student doesn't learn best in a virtual environment.
True. Wow, that's a lot. Like, I mean, I'm living this through my daughter, and she's a student athlete, so she does track and field. She missed her whole outdoor season, last semester, and now she's missing her indoor season. And she's already said, I mean, they don't know, they're hopeful, but she's like, Mom, I'm not gonna have it. Like, we're not gonna have a season this year. I'm like, no, baby. So like, as you're saying all these things out loud, it's really kind of hitting me like, wow, our kids they're going through a lot. They are really going through a lot. So what can we do? I mean, what are some things that we as parents, teachers, other professionals that deal with college students, what can we do to support them? And how can we make sure that we notice, some of these signs and symptoms? So I'll just share personally, my couple of things. My daughter is very much like me in the sense that she just, we don't hold things inside of us. So my husband and my older daughter are very much, they keep things tight. Myself and my younger daughter, we're just bleh. So if something's bothering us, 9 times out of 10, you're going to know about it. And so I'm thankful for that, because she will pick up the phone and just call and, say like, Mom, either she'll vent or she'll cry, or, but so I feel like I'm thankful that for the most part, I'm not saying she tells me everything, but I kind of have an idea, or I think I have an idea of how she's feeling and when things are going well, when they're not going well. And also in our family, we even before COVID, we do a lot of FaceTime. Now that my oldest daughter has moved out of the home and my youngest daughter is in college, and so my husband and I and the kids, we do FaceTime almost every day. And so for me, I feel like technology has helped because I can put my eyes on her. So, on the phone, you may hear maybe your child sounds a little down, but they're pretending to be okay. But when you can see them on FaceTime, it just adds a little bit, an extra layer. So that's one of the ways that I feel like I'm kind of, keeping tabs as much as possible. But do you have any other suggestions for parents, for those of us who, even if our kids are home with us or if they're away, and just how can we support them without being like hyper vigilant, without being the helicopter mom or dad?
Well, I think the first thing is something that you mentioned. It's important to intentionally connect with your children. Um, Granted, it's a little easier when they're in the house.
Yeah.
But if they're a way that you may want to kind of pick, well, this is, we have kind of a standing appointment to check in.
I like
And
that.
and if you start learning, does your child do better telling you how they're doing by text, or are they a talker? Because there's some kids that will text more than they talk, some that will talk more than they text. Another thing is, if you kind of need to prompt some conversations, for some reason everyone loves gifts. Use some gifts and emojis. Start trading gifts back and forth. It's an easy way to engage people. Like sometimes you can end up with the most creative strings of stuff where you don't even hardly use words, you just exchange gifts back and forth.
I like that.
But it's a way to kind of keep engagement fresh. If you're home and your child is home with you, then it's including your child in activities and in the family routine. Whereas if you have a college age child, especially one that didn't just graduate high school, they're used to being kind of separate. So a lot of times those children, when they would come home for the holiday, they'd be hanging out with their friends or doing whatever. They kind of had their own routine, which is very different than the routine of the house. So part of it's reintegrating them back into the household, integrating them in for meals, having some family activities, just some things so that they're actually integrated into the home. And if they're able to go out of the house, then they can do some of the functions with you. Pick a meal every now and then, and you all cook together or do something together. Or if, like you have a daughter, everyone could do their nails together. Just numerous activities that you can do together so that they feel tied to the family. The other thing is helping them creatively find ways to connect, as far as finding, if they don't have as many friends that are around or everyone's busy, figuring out there's some ways for them to virtually meet some new people.
Yeah.
Because they still need some type of social outlet other than the house. Um, and also just making sure that it's basic healthcare stuff that I'm sure you generally talk about too, is make sure they're not just eating junk. Make sure they actually eat vegetables. That they're not just sitting around eating ice cream and pizza. Encourage them to still exercise. There are some things you can do. You can either do family meditation or family yoga together, or go for walks together. So that's a good way to do things together, but still keep them active, because the one thing you also want to make sure is that they're in a good health space so that their immune systems are as good as possible, because we are still in a pandemic.
Yes.
But also physical activity is good to help with some of these emotional feelings and frustrations.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, Dr. Erica, thank you. That is
I
incredible.
try.
She's amazing, right, you all? I'm going to start scrolling through and let's see. We do have a couple of questions. And you all, if you have any questions for Dr. Ericka or myself, comments, let us know how you all are coping. How are you doing? Are your kids at home? Are they off at college? Are you worrying yourself to death? Are they being careful? Just let us know in the comments. So Zena says, what advice can a parent give a son who is a freshman longing for friends but forced to isolate? He is also disappointed and wanting to be back home. So I think you kind of addressed that without me even realizing that Zena had asked that question. But I know you talked about finding ways for them to engage with friends virtually. Certainly as a freshman, that is going to be difficult. But I know at my daughter's school, and hopefully some of the other schools are doing this too, and Dr. Ericka alluded to it, many of the colleges and universities are creating opportunities for virtual meetups, even for kids who are home. And they recognize that for some of them, some of the population is at home with their parents, some of the population is, in dorms, and some are in off-campus housing. And so many of the schools are really trying to find ways to connect, especially that freshman class, so that they can at least see faces and, learn names and, Zoom chat rooms and things like that. So I would encourage you, Zena, and your student to make sure that they are aware. I will share again with my daughter that she's a student athlete. And so her circle primarily involves the track and field team. And I have been nagging her since freshman year to her school does so many amazing events. And even with COVID, I get these emails about these virtual events they're going to be doing or socially distanced, like pumpkin carving. And most times she's like, nah. But my point is that chances are your child's school is hosting activities either in person or even virtually for those who are home. And a lot of times our kids aren't aware of it. They get so many emails and there's so much coming at them, and they're managing academics. And so they may not be checking those special social media pages for student services. And so they may be missing out on some of the notifications. So I would definitely encourage that for you all to, even as the parent, you can like some of those Facebook pages for your kid's school. I do it all the time. And then if I see an event, that I think is interesting, I'll take a screenshot of it and text it to my daughter. And usually I get some emoji back like, no, not doing it. But at least I have let her know, because half the time she's like, oh, I didn't even know they were doing that. So that's one suggestion. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I think that's one of the huge ones. And when in doubt, all of these institutions are still getting paid.
Girl.
So they're still staff. So even though the staff may be remote, if you can't, because some schools' websites are great, some are janky.
Yeah.
Is that if you can't find what you want in an email, contact the school. You paid them.
A lot.
And ask, because a lot of times people are still working through how to effectively communicate this information, or it may be on some weird page in the website that if you don't know to go there, you are not going to find it. But to me, this is old school. COVID is teaching me and reminding me to teach everyone, be analog. Sometimes you just got to ask. It's like asking for directions.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to ask for directions. Reading that map is going to drive you nuts.
And that GPS will have you in somebody's backyard.
Going in circles.
Yes.
Especially if there are too many tall buildings.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Let's see. Tigus, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tigus says, they are far. How do we follow all these symptoms? So I think we also addressed that to some degree. We talked about checking in with your child. I love Dr. Ericka's idea of scheduling time, have the child, you all put that on your calendar every Thursday night at 8:00 or whatever works for their schedule. And whether you do it by text or by telephone, or we do FaceTime, checking in regularly. The other thing that I sometimes like to do, and I use this with my patients, but I also use it with my kids, is to normalize things. And instead of kind of grilling them, like how, of course we all know, those of us that have teens and young adults, if you say, how is everything? You're usually going to get a one-word answer, and that's going to be fine. So you kind of have to be a little more creative. And so maybe you'll say things like, I know this is really hard being in school during COVID. And I would imagine that, you may be struggling with XYZ, how are things going? Or I read this article and it said that, college students are having this problem. Is that the case for you? Or maybe I'll even share, when I was in college and we weren't even in a pandemic, I remember sometimes feeling really anxious or feeling really sad. How are things going for you? So sometimes you can kind of use a conversation starter to get them to open up about their feelings. But do you have any other thoughts, Dr. Erica, about how we can monitor them?
I'd say one thing is this can be done in person or remotely. Is sometimes it's easier to have these conversations when you're doing something else so they're distracted. So, if you're playing a game, you're playing cards, you're cooking, everyone's doing their nails, you're doing something else and then you start talking.
Yes.
Because they're not as focused on the conversation. The other thing is I definitely understand there's a lot to keep an eye out for. And the one thing I want to say is it's not your responsibility to diagnose your kid.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
You just need to know there's something of concern.
Yes.
And then you do what? Ask for help. Because one of the things that you can do is a lot of times the first line of defense, a lot of times people will go to their primary care provider like Dr. Nicole. The other thing is there's nothing wrong with a mental health checkup. So you can see one of us, they could go to student mental health. A lot of those services still exist even though they're remote.
Yes.
Because as we said, people still getting paid.
Yes.
So use the services. I mean, the thing is if there's a question or there's a concern, just like you would go to the doctor if you had a cough or you were itching a lot and you go and sometimes it's like, you need some prednisone, you need this, you need to take an oatmeal bath, you need to do all this stuff, come back in a week, call me, and it's all this stuff. And sometimes it's like, all you need is one Benadryl, you don't even need to come back. So the same thing happens with mental health. Sometimes you have a concern, you have it checked out, and we're like, hey, that's within the scope of normalcy. This is a normal variant. Just keep an eye on it. You don't really need me too much. And that's what I wish people would use us more for.
Yes.
Is sometimes by the time people get in their head that it's really time to do something, that things have moved further along. And what I like to encourage people to do is don't wait till it's a crisis. If you have some concerns, you can always ask. You can always schedule an evaluation, call their pediatrician or their primary care doc, have a quick conversation, get them in line just to be checked out over in student health. There are just a lot of variety of options, but the goal isn't that you know all these symptoms so you can figure it all out. I have a lot of education. I have 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 4 years of general psych residency, 2 years of child fellowship, and then 15 years of practice on top of all of that. I'm not asking you to do what I do.
Yes. Say it again. No, that's true, because I think as parents, there is this sense that we all, of course, we feel responsible for our children, but I appreciate what you said, because even me, I mean, I'm a pediatrician, but I'm not a mental health professional and I'm too close to it. So I can't be my kid's doctor, you know what I mean? So even if I'm seeing things that I'm concerned about, my job is to make sure that they go see someone else who can actually help them. So I appreciate you saying that. It kind of lightens the burden for some of us parents, is that really, we're not expected to really fix it. Just notice that there's a change and then seek help. And I want to reiterate what Dr. Erica said, which is that, these student health services are still open. So, you all need to take advantage of that. Many of them are doing it remotely, but they are still available. So if your child is having any concerns about their mental health, if you are having concerns, they absolutely should contact the Student Health Center. Many schools have a separate student mental health center. There are apps. I mean, there's Talkspace. And so there's apps that your kids, I'm trying to stop saying children. There are apps that your kids can use, from the privacy of their dorm or their apartment, and they can be on their phone or on their tablet and they can engage with a mental health professional. So I think part of it is removing that stigma and making it okay. It's okay to need a little bit of help. It's okay to talk to a mental health professional. And I think in our country, we have done a disservice with kind of separating mental health and physical health, and people feeling like, well, I'm not crazy, and just not wanting to, seek that care. So I think that advice is really good. All right, let's see. We're going to wrap this up, you all. And Dr. Erica, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let's see. My son was diagnosed with seasonal depression and anxiety. I do worry because he gets depressed this time of year. Me not being able to see him when he hits his low moments is really difficult. Yes, Kimberly, I can only imagine. So use all the tips that Dr. Erica and I have shared with you all. Tigus, or I hope I'm saying your name right, says thank you both. Today's program also can be a starting point for discussion. Yes. So you all, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who, if this is your first time meeting me, I am extremely thankful and grateful to have you here on the College Health MD page. If you haven't already liked the page, please go ahead and like it. Share this video with your friends. If you have friends who have college students, please. My goal is to get this information spread as widely as possible. I know that many of our kids are suffering, and even for those who are doing okay right now, we want them to stay that way. And so I invite you to share this video with other college parents in your circle. Dr. Erica, how can people find you if they want to learn more about you and the other things that you offer?
Okay.
Where can we go to connect with you?
There are two easy ways to find me. One is I'm on social media at Dr. Ericka, DoctorEricka. My parents used all the letters. So DoctorEricka. That's me everywhere. The other thing is I also have a private telepsychiatry practice. I see people 18 and over. I'm not doing kids in that practice yet. So if you have someone that's 18 and over and you're concerned, or you're concerned about yourself and just want to get checked out, you can go to askdrgoodwin.com. That's askdrgoodwin.com, askdrgoodwin.com.
All right, you all, I'm putting that in the chat as well. So at Dr. Erica or askdrgoodwin.com. That is amazing. If you all want to follow me, you can follow me here on the College Health MD Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram, College Health MD. If you have other needs related to caregiving, if you are taking care of a senior parent or other relative, I encourage you to also follow me on Your GPS Doc to find out more about how I help caregivers. And we will be back with more content like this. I'm really looking forward to sharing some additional information with you all. I also have something really special for your students. So stay tuned on this page. I'll be making that announcement very, very soon, but I have something really special for your student. So be sure to continue to check back in here. Dr. Erica, thank you again so much. You all, thank you for joining us. Again, share this video with the friends in your life that have college students. I think that they would definitely benefit from this. And I'll see you all next time. Have an amazing week. You all wear your masks, wash your hands, social distance. It's not over. It is not over. Be safe.
Like I'm doing the visual cues.
Yes. And vote, please. Please vote if you haven't already. Take care. Thanks, Dr. Erica.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.